So I'd like to move, if I may, into the much more interesting and innovative and nimble world of the independent record label. And I'd like to ask you, Tim, why did you go independent? Did you even have a choice?
That there was a choice. Yeah, I mean, look, I think that in the early days when we were operating Elephant Traks, we had a little bit of a staunch independent mentality. I've come to understand that actually there's really no difference between the artists on major labels and independent labels, other than perhaps some capital and some networks, and also a little bit of power in the marketplace. But the independent pathway for us was really just about sitting down and getting our hands dirty. So there was not a pausing to shop around a record. It was probably unique to the circumstances of which we were making music, which was a little bit more electronic and hip-hop orientated. In Australia, there wasn't really an enthusiasm from an industry perspective for these styles of music, so we simply had no choice, and we were pretty shit. And so what we needed to do was to create our own sense of momentum. So we started very much from the ground up.
And you would come smack into contact with copyright, music publishing issues, licensing, sampling. All of those things. How did you find your way through that thicket? What approaches as an independent did you take to kind of get your head around that?
Okay, well, I think, if we're talking about hip-hop, and I don't know how many people are interested in some of the nuances of hip-hop in the room, but just quickly brushing over some of the issues. Obviously, there's an ethical issue relating to sampling and using and reappropriating and reworking old music into new music. That's an area where I think there is a certain kind of obligation to try and to do things the right way. Then there is the sledgehammer notices served by the copyright owners and their lawyers, which is a good motivation to clear samples and do things the right way. I do think there's a kind of pragmatism that is involved from our perspective, and that is that if you're flying under the radar and it's early days, I know that the lawyers are all just sharpening their teeth right now as I say this. There is a keeping things in perspective as far as the clearing particular samples may not be available to you as an independent artist. Let's be frank, you cannot get some of those samples cleared. You do not have those networks that can clear those issues for you. So you either just completely eliminate the music and start again, or find another way to do it, or you do it and accept the consequences. Now the consequences may be that if you're Gautier and your record blows up so big that you could never have ever imagined how big it will be, and you're negotiating something retrospectively, then you're going to have to give up more than the original sample was worth to the song that you have created. Now that's probably something where a guy as humble as him is going, well, $20 million is still better than $20. So even if I have to give that money up, I have to. So we have taken we've taken the pragmatic path. And some of the records that we do have to really sit down and get those samples cleared now, because when we started there was no industry, there was no follow through. In fact, it was it's been one of the things that has been important to the development of Elephant Traks, is just watching, different parts of the industry become really interested in this style of music. Now you cannot really get away with it on the same level. So if we're putting out a record that we know is going to sell, 1,000 copies, we're not going to worry about trying to clear a $10,000 sample. We will go in there and say, well, this is a piece of art and we feel strongly about it, but if we have to say goodbye to it, we have to say goodbye to it. If we have got a record like one that's coming up very shortly, in a week and a half, which will chart.
Come on, give us the name and the artist.
The record, it's by a group called One Day, and we had a number of samples on that record, and some of them weren't that valuable to the songs themselves, but the fees that were charged from it we just had to weigh it up. We kind of went, well, is that worth it? And because the release is coming out through a joint venture with us and Sony decided that they didn't want to pay that money, so we took the samples off the record.
That's a big creative impact where a legal issue hits straight into what the artist wants to do, and it's a real balance. Julia, when young bands are signing deals with smaller or indie labels, what are the main mistakes they make or the main things they need to look out for?
I kind of take sort of, I guess, a commercial perspective first in relation to looking at a deal from an independent. You have to sort of look at the context before you look at the terms, of course. So you look at who that label is and what they've done and what they're offering. And this sort of sounds really basic, but what does the band want? You know, what do you want from this deal? What do you want to do with your career? You know, do you want to be, you know, do you want a label that's focused in the Australian market or somewhere else? And then it's a matter of matching the terms of that agreement with the expectations, I guess. And then, you know, I think if we're talking about mistakes, I think one of the big mistakes a lot of artists make, and I can understand this is a really emotional thing, but that, you know, when you've never been offered any deal or anyone's been interested in your music and someone kind of offers you a deal and there's nothing else on the table, then it's really, really hard to turn that down no matter how bad it is. And, you know, I'm sure you're the same, Jules, and I'm sure at the Arts Law Centre as well, that the words, you know, just because you've been offered this and it's the only deal you've offered doesn't mean it's a good deal. And I think that it's really hard to separate the emotion from and sort of look basically at what are the expectations, what do you want to achieve, what can this business offer you, do you have the same kind of creative vision and business vision? And I'm sure that's, you know, how Tim also operates with dealing with his artists too.
It's really hard to you know, as an artist, I mean, depending on where you are in your career, it's really hard to take a wad of money and weigh that up against perhaps a wiser long-term perspective. And it doesn't really matter whether you're young and haven't put out a record, or whether you're a few records in and you've been battered and bruised a few times. If money is presented at you, it changes. There is something about the way that your brain processes that offer, and you know, it's quite hard to take it with a rational viewpoint, which is where I guess the lawyers really are important in that scenario. But you know, one of those, when you're talking about majors, without going into too much detail, I guess a couple of the pitfalls are that it's one of those commitments that you make when you're really ready to play at a higher, that you play those higher stakes. So there's more money being invested, and a major is that company that can really give you that muscle when you need it at that right time. So if you're a young artist and a major believes in you, then great, maybe you're the savior of the music industry, and that's fantastic because you might succeed. I guess the other great danger of majors is that because of the changing sort of the grounds of majors, where companies merge and A&Rs are fired and different staff move around and move from company to company. Sometimes those individuals in those companies are your champions. So the people that come and sign you and have that passion and sell it to you, if they're gone, all of a sudden you have this vacuum. And as an artist or even as a manager, it can be very difficult to navigate your way back out of that.
No one signed to Sony because they like the Blue S. It's always about the personalities. And we could sort of get onto some live material in a minute, but Julie's approach is my approach too, and it's, if you're all business people out there doing this, is this deal even what I want to do? And it's actually a much more cost-efficient way of advising clients to go, well, I'm not going to even look at the fine print. Who are these people? Why do you want to be with them? What have they told you they can do? That's far more important, because the power of independent record business is increasing. You've always got options, and it's a matter of understanding where your copyrights and your economic rights live, which is one of the most important functions of this kind of seminar, and also what Music New South Wales does, and then sizing the deal up. Joining APRA is a no-brainer. Signing to your dad's uncle's crap label just because he's got a mate with a studio is not a good idea, especially if he wants 9 albums and all your publishing. So we don't have time to go into the specifics of the detail, but increasingly the approach is what is going to work for me. I mean, the fundraising options have changed the game somewhat, because really what you needed the labels for was the marketing power and high production values, and those things are available by independent means now. The distribution networks are still there. Yes, you do have to encounter those, but there's never been a time where there was more choice. It's scarier, but there's never been a time where there's more choice. And what I wanted to ask Jennifer is, are you seeing an increase in clients of your art centre coming to you with indie deals? What kind of deals are they? What kind of deals are musicians coming to you asking for advice on more increasingly now? Have you noticed any trends?
Yeah, the trend is probably with online music distribution deals. I think they've had enough time to sort of play out now for a few years, and we're getting to the stage now where people are coming to us and they're saying that they're not seeing any royalties, the distribution service isn't delivering what they promised, and it's often quite hard to sort of get out of that deal. So I suppose the thing there is looking at what the termination clause is before you sign up, and understanding what it is that service is promising to do for you, because often it's just putting your music online, it's not really doing any sort of marketing and all that sort of stuff that will get you the royalties.
It's just busy aggregating the biggest catalogue it can to market it out the back end for the metrics harvesters. And while I've got a captive audience, and you guys will agree with me, you've got to watch out for those automatic renewals. You miss a notice date and you're in the bad orchard for another year. You know, those things are quite dreadful. There's nothing you can do about it. You're stuck, and you have to decide what battles to fight. And so. I'm
sorry, Jules. Sorry to bother you. Can you please explain a little more detail about automatic renewals?
Oh, I beg your pardon. And that's a good point. So you enter these deals for a period of time. Might be a year. You give us all your catalogue for 1 year from the date hereof. And you go, oh, that's cool. It'll just be a year. We'll see how it goes. I'm going to be very busy touring. I want all this just taken care of. This is great. The catch is, though, that if you don't jump through various hoops and send them particular letters and send their attorney one simultaneously or whatever, you might find that agreement just rolls over automatically. You agreed that it would just go for another year. And so there's this whole magical hoodoo you have to go through to stop to get out of the contract. So the termination provision is really good. Most of the big reputable music aggregator services will let you just leave when you want to, but they need enough notice to get organised. But it's something you've got to really watch for. And any idiot can set up an aggregation service. So it's the kind of Wild West, isn't it, Jennifer?
Can I just jump in just about some of those deals where you were talking before, Julia, about all the additional rights that some labels, whether they're independent or majors, I'm not sure how independents operate. I think that one thing that's important to just establish is that the majors are the bad guys and the indies are the good guys. It's just not true. indies quite often are subject to the kind of resources that they can provide to you, and sometimes that's just really half-assed, and that can be really against your interests. So it's really not as black and white as that. But if any kind of label does want to sort of pile on these extra rights, whether they be merch or whether they be live, then there has to be some kind of information that is provided to you to guarantee exactly how they're going to support you in those endeavours. Because if you are actually a good band, you're going to have to assume that that's going to be a real generator of revenue and a source of your band surviving over the course of time. And if they're not actually providing anything towards that, I think a lot of the ways that majors work is that if you're a certain level of band, then they will allocate this marketing budget to your record. However, your live activity could continue that way beyond, and so the label has not actually spent that much on you, but you're kind of allocating a portion of all of that live activity to this label who really have no rights to that whatsoever. So really it's just about as simple as trying to find a way that you can guarantee that they have some sort of expertise or some sort of understanding of that part of the business.
That's a really good point, and notably it is the majors over the last few years, and Julie will attest to this, I'm sure, and may even have some stories, who have backed off acquiring the rights because they realised they just couldn't service the rights and it was bad PR. So then they retreated to a position of just clipping the ticket, and now you can generally negotiate ceilings whereby they won't come down on your live income until a certain amount is earned. No indie does that. They're just so cash poor compared to a major, they can't even afford to give you those breaks. So Tim's point is absolutely on the money, and it comes straight back to what Julia opened with, which is you got to size up the deal to work out whether it's good for you or not. Sometimes you need advice to work out whether it is good or not, but it all really starts from whether it's a good match for you and your act. Question?
Jules, just a really quick question on the word aggregate or aggregator. Could you give a top-line summary of what that is?
We'll go to Jono for that.
Fantastic, thank you.
So in answer to your question, there are a number of services these days who operate in the online digital space and basically have as their clients individual owners of a small number of tracks. So typically people who are not through a label. As I said before, organisations like iTunes don't like dealing with the little people, and so it's really hard if you've just recorded 10 tracks in a studio and you want to put those up on iTunes, to go to iTunes and say, can you ingest my 10 tracks into the iTunes store please and make them available. iTunes will typically just not get back to you. So there was a gap in the market, and what's known as digital aggregators emerged, where lots and they did deal with all of the individuals, but then they went to iTunes on behalf of thousands of individual album owners, and iTunes was prepared to deal with them. But as Jules says, they clipped the ticket on the way through. So that 65 to 70% of the $2.19 that I was talking about that should go direct to the owner of the copyright in the sound recording, the digital aggregator gets the reporting from iTunes, clips the ticket, takes, 10% these days, something like that, and then passes the rest through to the original recorder of the music. And the danger with that is, you might reach a stage in your career where suddenly, you do get signed to an independent label, and your independent label has that relationship with iTunes, and they can make your recordings available on iTunes under the terms of that deal. But meanwhile, you've just renewed automatically, unbeknownst to you, with your deal with that digital aggregator. And there's Orchard, there's we won't list them all, but there's TuneCore. It's that sort of organisation, and suddenly you find yourself in a difficult position. So that's what we're talking about.
Probably you can apply a certain level of common sense to some of these questions as well before you're picking up the phone and calling the lawyers and people who probably are better equipped to deal with you at a little bit further down the line, and just go to the secret of life, which is Google or YouTube. And type in gripes with XX aggregator or like problems with, and see what is said in forums.
There's never been a time when there's been more information available. Some of it is frankly bogus, but you're sensible people, you're old adults. Look, we're really fast running out of time, and we haven't spoken about live work. I know that from a sort of industrial relations perspective, our friends at MEAA wanted to talk about recent legislation affecting managers and artist representatives. So it's important because the law has changed, and now there's some quite strict requirements for people who are managers and agents, which you can speak to quickly, I guess. And then we can briefly traverse some pitfalls of live performance agreements and some experiences that you guys have had helping artists there, because often MEAA is where people go to find out what their rights were as an employed musician. If we've got time, we might take a couple of questions, but we're in wrapping up mode. We've been a totally marathon run, so on that point, I'll just ask you guys to fill us in on what happened with the Entertainment Industry Act in New South Wales, and then maybe talk about what advocacy you provide for live musicians.
Sure. There's on your tables. There's a fact sheet about the entertainment industry regulations. Just as a matter of interest, can you put your hand up if you knew that act existed? That there was an act that regulated the entertainment industry? Cool. So, 3 of you. It's a pretty good indication that as an industry, because half of us are playing in our bedroom or playing at the local pub or whatever, we don't realise that there are these regulations that actually protect artists and protect management and protect venues and protect all those sorts of people. That fact sheet is fairly I think it's a huge sort of topic, so you could talk on it for ages, and I'm not a lawyer, so I can't sort of expand on it too much. But basically what the MEAA and AFMA has done is taken the entertainment industry regulation changes, which came into effect
in March.
Yeah, and came up with this fact sheet. I don't know, Mike, if you want to talk more.
I think you can read the fact sheet, and if there's questions about it, we can answer them as best as we can. But I suppose it's a lot like all the other things we've been talking about in relation to contract and copyright. If someone puts a piece of paper in front of you and says, yep, we really like you, we want to take you on board, just sign this now. It's really practical advice talking about, what do I do? Because people with no experience are going to be put in that situation and are put in that situation all the time in the industry. Even if you trust the person, it's someone you want to go with, if there's a document in front of you that's going to bind you contractually, and I would suggest you should do this with any kind of workplace engagement or employment relationship you may be entering into. So that's great. I'm really interested in being involved with you guys, whether it be an agent or with a label. I just want to take it away and consider it for a few days. And as a minimum, we advise that you take 7 days. It can vary, depending on the... maybe the lawyers on the panel have a view on that as well. But if you don't do that, try and read it yourself, and the bits you don't understand, take to get some proper advice from, whether it be APRA, a lawyer, Mia, we have lawyers as well to advise. And certainly don't stand there with your pen in hand and go, well, I'm nervous, I want to do it anyway, because you need to think about, as it's been suggested, think about the sustainability of your career and whether that decision you're being asked to make on the spot is the right one.
The classic is, I'm just on the plane to London. If you don't sign this agreement, I can't pitch you to Razor and Tie Records. We get it. How many times would you get that? And sorry to just jump in, I wanted to point out the background of this legislation. In New South Wales, of all the states, the managers were so naughty and the booking agents were so naughty, and they were charging the venues and charging the band and taking a little commission from everybody, that a whole lot of people decided in the 80s to regulate it. And they made it, put it as a licensed profession for you to represent artists.
And what percentage have a licence? What percentage of managers actually have a license?
In the music industry,
12.
You were expected to have a license if you practiced as a manager or a venue operator or an agent.
You don't need to have it anymore.
No, one of the things that has changed is you no longer need to have a license.
Lucky.
But one of the things that in the 80s they decided they wanted to enact was a code of conduct for managers, which said this is how you deal with artists' money. This is how these are the records you've got to keep. This is the transparency you've got to maintain. This is how you're to deal with their funds, so on and so forth. And that all got left to a committee that never made it, and so it never happened. So with the change in the law, managers don't need a license anymore. They just have to adhere by a code of conduct, which is no more than a decent manager would do anyway when dealing with other people's money. And they have to give an information sheet. And when you sign one of these contracts with them, you get 3 business days to call off and decide you don't want to do it. So it reduces the risk of artists getting hustled into deals they didn't want to do. It also means if you're hoping to be a manager that you need to get your head around these things and comply with these. And as I said before, the code of conduct is no more than you would do as a trustee of your client's money anyway. But an interesting thing is, even if you breach that code, it doesn't mean that the contract is void. So we're yet to see whether it'll actually be of any assistance whatsoever to artists, other than as a negotiating point.
Hey Jules, sorry, back here, this is Kirsty in the crowd, over here. On this point, I would say, ballpark guess, 90% of the managers that we deal with, and even when we have manager workshops like this, they don't sign agreements with their artists. So how does this legislation actually protect artists, and how is it enforced?
we do have a view, and this comes also from other large side of our union, which is Actors Equity. You may have heard of them. We had basically a rule within the union that we didn't want agreements signed either in relation to actors, who are also very freelance and working across the industry in many ways. However, with the new legislation, the capacity, you don't have to have a written agreement, but if you're claiming that you're a manager, there is a requirement to provide a written agreement, and that written agreement should outline, and there's some guidelines within the code and in relation to what you're going to offer that individual artist or that band for that matter in relation to what you're going to do in terms of representation. And
you can't charge 20% unless you've got a written agreement.
Well, and that's the key thing. There's a 10% cap if you don't have a written agreement and you're not claiming that you're an actual manager. And there are some arguments about the definitions of that as the new regulations have come in. But basically, if you as an artist see anything with more than 10% in there as the arrangement, that's okay, that's allowable, but there needs to be a written agreement, and it needs to specify how they're going to support you individually in your career, because they're managing your career rather than just sending you out to jobs, if that makes sense.
Any other questions about the management, the Entertainment Industry Act and all of that?
It should also be just quickly established that you don't sign, like for the majority of circumstances, you don't sign agreements or contracts with booking agents as well. For the live industry, like at least as far as I know, I've never seen a contract in the entire time I've been involved in music.
Tim, do your artists sign management agreements?
Yes, yeah. Sort of.
Like once they get to a certain point where you go, okay, this is legit, or?
Yeah, I mean, I guess from a perspective of, if you work with an artist and you put everything into it, from a manager's point of view, you do want to know that if there's another offer that comes through after 5 years, 8 years, that they can't just sort of jump ship and all of that work that you put into it is null and void because of the terms that is offered by the new manager, which even if the artist wants to maintain a good relationship might in turn screw you over as manager. There is a need to have those contracts in place.
And vice versa as well.
Exactly. Like from the artist's perspective, they want to know that there's something solid there that they can go back to and be able to refer to. I always think with contracts, and once again, probably not the advice that you'll ever hear from a lawyer, but most lawyers will say, you know, like, let's do this contract, let's sort it out, let's just put it away. But by far the most important thing between an artist and their manager and vice versa is having that good relationship. Without the good relationship, if you've got enough money, you could probably squash any contract. So really that, you know, it's sort of something that can't be elaborated on here, but that relationship is absolutely paramount. If you have your artist's best interests, and if there's something that you cannot provide to the artist, then perhaps it's not, a contract's not going to be in the best interest of your artist. So as a manager, maybe, you know, from a common sense point of view, you'll be able to navigate your way out of that. But certainly from a kind of industry perspective, an agreement's ideal.
I have to say that the better and more professional managers and agents are, the less problems they have, the less fights they have. It's just the fact that folk who are confident in their skills and are well aligned don't tend to get into difficult conflicts. Now that's not always the case. There have been important fights, but generally the good operators are just good operators.